Welcome to the Higher Ed Retire Podcast with your host, Greg Shepard. Greg is a fee-only financial advisor who specializes in helping those in higher education to take control of their retirement. Since 2001, Greg has helped employees all over the country make the most of their retirement plans.
Hey folks, Greg Shepard here, Higher Ed Retire Podcast. I appreciate everybody listening today. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about risk, okay? Now, I'm going to attempt to verbalize this conversation around risk. So hang with me as I kind of stumble through this. It's not the easiest thing to talk about in terms of trying to get my point across. It's a lot easier to do visually, but I'm going to attempt it in this podcast, okay? For those of you that don't know me, I'll kind of reintroduce or introduce myself to you. Again, my name is Greg Shepard. I deal with higher education employees, been doing so for 20 years. I help them navigate their retirement plans and get them to retirement and, of course, post-retirement as well. I have an independent investment management firm in Kansas City, but I deal with higher ed employees all over the country. And folks, if you're looking for other informative podcasts, please check out my website, www.safinancialservices.com. And if you have any questions regarding this podcast as we go through it and you've kind of digested this information, or you just want to contact me in general, my email, greg@shepardfinancial.com, and Shepard is spelled S-H-E-P-A-R-D. Okay, back to this conversation of risk. Now, the reason, the catalyst I'm doing this is that the market, and by the way, folks, I'm doing this in the middle of 2021. So the market in the last two-thirds of 2020 did very well. The market in 2021 so far is doing well. Clients are wondering, hey, when's the rug going to be pulled out from underneath me? When is this market going to correct? And folks, by the way, a correction is defined by when the market backs up 10% or more from its most recent high. We are due for a correction. On average, we go through 2 corrections per year. We haven't had one in a long time, okay? Well, back 2020 during the COVID mess. But since we got out of that, market speaking here, we have not gone through a correction. I'm surprised we haven't. With that being said, I'm having a lot of conversations around risk with my clients. Now, these conversations with my clients around risk is a lot easier with this new software I've implemented into my practice. So that is what I'm going to talk about with you today. So what I want to do is back up in time, all right? Just 5, 6, 7 years ago. And this has probably happened to you, some kind of scenario like this in your adult investing life. Okay, so we're going to role play here. You listening out there, you're Mr. and Mrs. Client, and of course, I'm the advisor. So let's say 6 years ago, I as the advisor sitting across the table from you, Mr. and Mrs. Client. Well, you're Mr. and Mrs. Prospect right now, sitting across the table from you, so to speak. Well, as of late, probably sitting across the monitor with all the Zoom calls. Okay, so you get the idea. We do the prospecting, dog and pony show. You become a client, you sign the paperwork. Now the conversation surrounds how we're going to invest the money. Back then, we would agree, we would kind of talk things out, but we would ultimately agree, let's say hypothetically, that you wanted 70% in the stock market. What in the world does that mean? Okay, folks, back then, it was darn near impossible for us to identify how much risk is in that portfolio. You couldn't tell me, and folks, I couldn't tell you as well. All right, now I know you have 70% in the stock market, but inside that 70%, what is the risk associated with those stocks? Think about this. Let's say we have 2 different portfolios, both 70-30, a 70-30 split, 70% stocks, 30% bonds. So client A has a 70% stock portfolio, of which that 70% is invested in tech, growth stocks, small cap stocks, emerging market stocks. Client B, of that 70%, invested in value stocks, dividend-paying stocks, utilities, healthcare. So what I'm getting at is both are 70% stocks. Client A is a heck of a lot more aggressive than client B. All right. Now, you as a client probably wouldn't even be able to identify that. Most people, okay? To you, it's 70% stocks. But how much risk is in those stocks? Same thing with bonds. Client A has, we're talking about the bond market here, client A has junk bonds, synonymous with high yield, and just high-flying bonds that pay high interest, okay? Client B or prospect B, treasuries, tips, things of that nature. that are very conservative. Again, both 30% in the bond market, but one is highly more aggressive than the other, but 70-30 nonetheless. All right? So those conversations around risk were darn near impossible back then. Now, with the evolution of technology, hang with me here, with the evolution of technology, I'm now able to visually, a lot better than verbally, but visually show clients how much risk is in their portfolio in any given scenario, economic scenario. Folks, this software is fantastic. The software is called Riskalyze, Riskalyze. Now, you're not going to go out and buy this software, I don't think. It's a little pricey. So most good advisors in this industry will have this software. I'd say something similar, but folks, I don't think I've found anything on the marketplace that kind of rivals this software. So how I use it with clients is I plug their portfolio into the software. All right, the first thing I do, and I'm just going to focus on a few areas of this software because it's very powerful. I love it. I'm a numbers geek, but let's be honest, most people don't want to get in the weeds regarding this stuff. So I use a very few points of this software. First thing I do is we go to this, what do I call it? Like a bar graph almost, okay? It's a barbell graph. And what it does is it shows you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this software indicates that your portfolio has a 95% chance of, with the 70-30 split, you have a 95% chance in the next 6 months that your portfolio will be between negative 10% or positive 15%. It's a pretty wide gap. But what we do is we try to focus on that downside. So, Mr. and Mrs. Client, down 10%, 95% probability that it's going to be between negative 10 and positive, 15. You have a 5% outlier or 5% anomaly, like a black swan type event, like a 2020 event, where your portfolio could go down more than 10%. But, that's fairly unlikely. However, with the knowledge that your portfolio could go down 10% the next 6 months, how does that make you feel? Nobody likes to lose money, but we also have to be educated enough to know what goes down in time can go up, right? And my job as an advisor, if things go down, to reallocate and get into things that I think are going to go up faster than others. But if nothing's done, what is that emotional threshold? What's that negative number that you are, I'll say, comfortable with? Nobody's comfortable with losing money. But if your account's down 10% in the next 6 months, what are you going to do? Nothing? Email me, call me, yell about me to your spouse, whatever the case is, okay? Now, if the answer is nothing, then we're good. But if you kind of think to yourself, whoa, next 6 months, if my account's down 10%, I got a problem. All right? Maybe you're real close to retirement, whatever the case is. I ain't dealing with that. All right? So what we do is we reallocate the portfolio inside the software where we have a number that you're comfortable with. Maybe that number is negative 5%. I don't know. You'd have to answer that. And it's very difficult to answer. It's kind of a roundabout guesstimation, okay? Because we really don't know how we emotionally feel until the event is actually presented to us. But what we do is we use this as a guide or that threshold for future reference because, folks, the market's going to back up. It's inevitable. It will happen at some point. But let's say the market backs up and you're comfortable with that negative 8% in the next 6 months, all right, according to the software. And the market backs up and your account's down 6% in the next 6 months. All we do is refer back to the meeting that said, hey, remember when things were good? I know you're emotionally a little distraught now, but remember, you were okay with it going down to 8%. That was kind of your bottom floor, all right, so to speak. So that tells us we need to do, I'm in air quotes here, do nothing right now. Maybe we tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, we let this thing go and we just watch it, but we know what your emotional threshold is going to be. It's that negative 8%, and we're not there yet, okay? So that gives folks the emotional fortitude to stay, what is it? Stay the ship. There's a lot of cliches I could use for that reference, but you get the idea, okay? So it really empowers us to have that conversation around risk, and it empowers the client to realize how much risk is in their portfolio, total portfolio, not just the stock market. All right, so the days are gone where you sign up with an advisor and say, yeah, I think I want 70% in the stock market. That sounds good. Or I want 80%, or I only want 50-50. So those days are gone. Now we can use software to really hone in on how much risk you are emotionally willing to take. And again, this software does all kinds of awesome things that I am not even going to touch right now. Remember, I said I can go back. If you have a portfolio, I can see exactly what that portfolio did during 2008. You name the time frame, I can pinpoint what your portfolio did during that time. So to kind of piggyback off that, I'm running a little long here, long-winded. My bond clients, so typically those that are retired taking income, I can show them what their portfolio did during 2013, which is not a good year for the bond market. And I'll say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, during 2013, your bond portfolio did this. Now we're still getting interest, but the bonds devalued maybe 5%, whatever the case is, in 2013. If that happened next year, we could start having that conversation. And if that's too much risk, we need to reallocate those bonds, okay? Again, fantastic software. It's really helped improve conversations with clients around risk. Now, most of you out there, of course, are not clients, okay? And again, I don't expect you to go out and buy this software. What I'm going to do is something, again, a little off the beaten path. We'll see how this turns out. But I'm going to offer, the goal of this podcast is really to help people out. Along the way, if people see value in my services, of course, I'm looking to gain clients through this podcast, okay? That's pretty obvious. It should be fairly obvious. But also, I'm trying to help people as well. So I am going to offer to run this software on on your portfolios with a caveat, okay, of course. Now, again, I'm doing this in June of 2021. Now, if I have an influx of 20 people wanting to do this at the same time, I'll have to limit what I do in that regard. But if a few of you want me to do this, it doesn't really take a lot of my time, and I will be happy to do it for you, give you the information, and you can run with it. I'll help you out a little bit as much as I can, but I'll give you an idea of how much risk is in your portfolio. Now, if you're listening to this like in 2022, 2023, feel free to contact me. Odds are I'm not getting a lot of demand. There's not a lot of demand for me to do this a year or two down the road. All right. So if I get a few people, under 10 wanting to do this, I have no problem doing that. Now, contact me. My email, greg@shepardfinancial.com. Shepard is SHEPARD. My website, www.safinancialservices.com. And folks, I want to mention something real quick. I'm going to hold a webinar. This will be really advantageous for you out there. I'm holding a webinar to visually show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to demonstrate Riskalyze in a webinar June 24th at 2 o'clock Central. Okay, again, now folks, this is in 2021, so if you're listening to this in 2022, hey, maybe you can shoot me an email and I can send you the recording. But let me know if you want to attend that webinar again, June 24th at 2 o'clock Central Time. A little long-winded here, but this is an important topic, and I wanted to make sure I did an okay job verbalizing this. All right, folks, Greg Shepard, Higher Ed, Retire podcast. I appreciate everyone listening out there. Hey, folks, remember, take control of your retirement today. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Retire podcast. Just because this episode is over doesn't mean you can't continue your retirement journey. Please visit www.higheredretire.com to see how you can work with Greg or to simply ask him a question. Thanks again.
S&A Financial Services is a registered investment advisor. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor and/or tax professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.